Ken has got some new news for us, some breaking news, but I want to get you first, James, on the allegations that Raskin is laying out about these payoffs. He calls them payoffs.
He does call them payoffs. And what we need to understand here is the procedure that makes this possible. So there's a law called the Federal Tort Claims Act. Now, that's a mouthful. But what it exists to do is when the government wrongs someone, this act exists to help make them whole. If you slip on a banana peel in a federal office building, you should be able to get compensated just as you would in a supermarket. The problem here is that historically and administratively, what that law requires is a period in which the government gets the opportunity to decide whether to settle a claim. You must file an administrative claim first before you file a full lawsuit. And the idea there is that the government should settle meritorious claims and should avoid the cost and the inconvenience for everyone of litigation. What has happened, though, is that this administration is driving a truck through that hole. And what they are doing is they are using that gap, that period where you file the administrative claim before the lawsuit, not to settle meritorious claims, but to pay their own. That's what Congressman Raskin is alleging.
And it's kind of in part and parcel with a lot of the other claims of people getting paid, Donald Trump's allies, supporters of his who have been accused or convicted by DOJ for various crimes, suing the government and getting paid off. There have been a number of cases of this. And Donald Trump, by the way, is suing the government, trying to get paid for a leak of his taxes.
The president of the United States is suing the American taxpayers for $230 million. And you know who makes the decision on whether he gets to settle that claim? At the moment, Todd Blanche.
OK, Ken Dilanian, you've got some new reporting. Yesterday, I was curious about the stats that Kash Patel was rattling off in answering various senators, including the senator we just played, Senator Kennedy. He held up at one point a laminated sheet that showed all of the crime stats under his leadership. What have you found out about those?
Katie, Carol Leonnig and I were curious about that, too, in part because we had reporting that raised questions about some of these stats. And we just dropped a story on msnow.com that says, in part, that one of the reasons that the FBI is saying that they've doubled violent crime arrests from 2025 over 2024 is because they're counting it differently. They're counting, for example, arrests made on immigration raids where FBI agents were just participating. And they're also counting arrests made by state and local jurisdictions where an FBI agent happened to be along on the operation. And those are arrests that did not get counted before. So it's not comparing apples to apples. So FBI insiders are saying this is a blatant attempt to pad the stats. And Kash Patel, again, was using this as a way to distract and have people look away from these questions about his personal conduct and the major policy changes he's making at the FBI. And the other big thing that we're reporting is that Kash Patel has said over and over again that the FBI has had great success under his tenure capturing fugitives on the vaunted 10 most wanted list that's been around for decades. When we looked into this, we found out that of the 6 people who were captured from the most wanted list during Kash Patel's tenure, 4 of them were captured the same month they were placed on the list, and 2 of them were captured within 24 hours. And when we started talking to people about it, what we learned is that essentially the FBI is gaming the system, according to insiders. They are putting people on the list, elevating people to that list that they know are about to be captured. In one case, a fugitive in Mexico was captured an hour and 13 minutes after being placed on the list. And of course, to mount a complex operation to capture a fugitive in Mexico takes longer than an hour of planning. So they knew that was underway, and they put this person on the list. And then Kash Patel goes out and says, hey, we're way better than the Biden administration at capturing people on the 10 most wanted list. Now, look, it's great that they're capturing these fugitives. No one is disputing that. It's just the idea that Kash Patel is boasting that this is somehow a feather in his cap as the FBI director because of these stats that really don't pan out as he's suggesting they do, Katie.
So, David, can you help me understand why Republicans are going along with this? There are the serious political allegations, but the drinking allegations alone. I mean, why aren't they even asking about it?
Because he works for Donald Trump, and they don't want to pick a fight with Donald Trump in the middle of primary season. And I also suspect that they're not having the same issues with Kash Patel and the FBI that they are, let's say, over at the Defense Department with Pete Hegseth. There's been a lot of grumbling behind the scenes among Republicans that they're not getting what they need out of the Defense Department so that they can help the Defense Department from their point of view. But I think Republicans, for now, are generally happy with how the FBI is running. They don't see it as a major political problem. And so even though Kash Patel, in his own way, is a political problem because he functions like a political partisan, which is something we haven't really seen out of, well, not really, it's something we haven't seen out of an FBI director in the past. And although this could cause Republicans problems down the line, I think what Republicans on the Hill tend to do is just sort of take these problems one at a time as they seem the most important for them to tackle from an internal political standpoint. We're in the middle of primary season. They don't want to get into an unnecessary conflict with President Trump. I think it's really as simple and uncomplicated as that. And this is the kind of thing that could change down the line, may change after the midterm elections in a big way. I think would change if the FBI were to be seen to have missed some major development, some major attack happened, something of that nature. But right now, that's not what Republicans are seeing.
Interestingly, Jake, you've got some reporting about things that are happening that aren't so loud among Republicans who appear to be breaking away from the president, that there are a lot of primaries that are already over, and Republicans who are now going to be facing constituents in a general election. Lay out what you're seeing, what Punchbowl is reporting.
Yeah, more and more, Katie, Republicans are just ignoring Trump. He asks for things and they just kind of let it go. I mean, he's asked for, the big headlines, $1 billion for this ballroom, which Republicans are cool too. He asked for the House to pass the Senate housing bill, which Republicans are not doing. He asked for a gas tax holiday, which I think they will ultimately do under pressure from the rank and file, but the leadership is really not eager to get that done. Just across the board on all of these issues, they're putting distance between themselves and Trump, whether they mean to or not. And I think there's good reason for that, given his approval rating and also just the practical. You don't know, not you, but no one knows when he's serious and when he isn't, right? I mean, it's sometimes he just riffs on X or on Truth Social, and we don't know whether that's a policy proclamation or not. So we're seeing this more and more up here on a day-to-day basis. Trump will ask for something, Congress will all but ignore it. And I think it's notable for a party that's been so closely tied to him legislatively for so long.
Do you anticipate hearing louder disconnects between these Republicans and the president as we get closer and closer to November?
No, I don't, because, listen, you still need Republicans to turn out to win Republican elections, right? If it's a Republican district in a midterm where Democratic turnout is expected to be high, you're still going to need Republicans to turn out. So it doesn't behoove them specifically to say, something nasty about Trump or come out against one of his big policies. But on these small policies, it's a lot easier to put distance between themselves and the president, and I think that's notable.
I want to play a little bit of sound, an interview with Brian Driscoll, the former acting FBI director. He sat down with CNN to talk about how he dealt with Patel and also Emile Beauvais, and specifically making politically motivated terminations and demands. Let's listen.
There was never any specific allegations or accusations coming from Beauvais that, these people on this list committed some kind of legal or policy violation.
In the lawsuit, it says that Beauvais told you that an allegation of misconduct was not necessary for him to terminate FBI personnel if he subjectively felt a loss of confidence in their ability to carry out the president's agenda.
When that request was made, we take it in. Tell me more. Why? Cultural rot in the FBI.
That was a phrase they used, cultural rot.
Yes. All of these other uninformed and wrong opinions. It's just disgusted and shocked.
Why were you disgusted?
Because now my fear that there was a political wave coming towards the FBI with vitriol directed at the FBI, it was palpable. And there was a sense of shock that, I'm really close to this thing.
Ken, how significant is it to hear directly hear these allegations directly from the former acting or deputy FBI director.
It was striking,
Former
Katie.
acting FBI director, excuse me.
Yeah, this is a person that the Trump administration picked to run the FBI before Kash Patel could be confirmed. And it was quite striking. Look, we've read these allegations in the lawsuit that Brian Driscoll and some of his colleagues have filed, but he's such a colorful character. And by the way, he is revered inside the FBI. He's done a lot of really interesting things in his career, and he's loved. And he was he was just very plain spoken and colorful, and just explaining that he was not going to knuckle under to what he thought was improper political pressure. He was willing to go and work for Donald Trump and run the FBI. But then as soon as those demands started, for example, for the names of all the agents that worked on January 6 cases and other what he thought were just improper requests that were being made of him, he just wasn't willing to do it. And he's alleging, of course, that Kash Patel told him that his job security was essentially based on his political leanings and that he needed to show loyalty to the president. We have never seen that in the modern history of the relationship between the White House and the FBI. Even in the Hoover days, that wasn't how it worked. And certainly post-Watergate, it doesn't work that way. And it's really just, it's sort of shocking to hear it come from Brian Driscoll's mouth in such stark terms, Katie.
James?
Yeah, to Ken's point, and just to echo what he said about being revered, the loyalty over competence theme could hardly be starker than it is with Brian Driscoll. In fact, Chris O'Leary, who's an MS Now contributor, said earlier on this network today that the Brian Driscolls of the world don't grow on trees, which is to say you lose that kind of expertise, that kind of competence, and you don't have the ability to replace it in an instant, no matter who you are.
The objective of this mission is the destruction of their ballistic missile capabilities and of their naval capabilities.
Hi again, everybody. It's now 5 o'clock in New York. That happened moments before we came on the air, or while we were on the air. We took it live, and we largely viewed Marco Rubio as the most trustworthy messenger in that moment about why we were in Iran. Not everybody said the same thing, but that's what Marco Rubio said back in March. Marco Rubio, of course, is Donald Trump's Secretary of State. He's also his national security advisor, and he could not have been more clear in his public statements. Quote, the objective of this mission, the war in Iran, is the destruction of Iran's ballistic missile capabilities, end quote. Well, now, as Donald Trump ramps up his attacks on the free press, on journalists and journalism, accusing them of, quote, virtual treason, it's a quote from Donald Trump, for reporting on the war, yet another one of his stated reasons for starting this deeply unpopular war of choice with Iran officially bites the dust, is no more. Brand new reporting from multiple outlets reveals that Iran's military is far from crippled. After weeks of war, the deaths of 13 U.S. service members, U.S. bases across the Middle East rendered, quote, all but uninhabitable. According to the New York Times, not to mention a devastating blow to U.S. prestige and standing around the world, U.S. intelligence shows that barely a dent has been made in the Iranian regime's capacity to wage war. A U.S. official with knowledge of recent intelligence assessments confirms reporting first released by the New York Times, then the Washington Post, to our colleague David Rode, that, quote, about 70% of Iran's mobile missile launchers remain viable throughout the country. Iran has also retained roughly 70% of its pre-war missile stockpile, which is believed to be comprised of long-range ballistic and short-range cruise missiles. The recent intelligence reports found Iran has restored access to 30 of the 33 missile sites it controls along the Strait of Hormuz, which could be used to target American warships and oil tankers transiting the strategic waterway. These findings directly contradict what Donald Trump and his cabinet have been saying for weeks now.
Their missiles are mostly decimated. They have probably 18, 19%, but not a lot by comparison to what they had.
Their missile launching capability has been substantially degraded.
Their ability to launch missiles and drones is dramatically curtailed.
They have some missiles, but not very many. I think we're in very good shape.
The ceasefire itself looking fragile, Donald Trump himself saying that it is, quote, on life support. The potential remains for renewed combat phase in this conflict in which the U.S. military is now in a tough spot. New York Times reports this, quote, the U.S. military has already depleted its stocks of many critical munitions, yet the intelligence suggests that Iran retains considerable military capability, including around the vital Strait of Hormuz. If Trump ordered commanders to launch more strikes or take out or diminish those Iranian capabilities, then the U.S. military would have to dig even deeper into stocks of critical munitions, end quote. U.S. intelligence undercutting one of Donald Trump's goals for the war with Iran is where we start the hour. Retired U.S. Army Brigadier General Steve Anderson is back with us. With me here at the table, senior national security reporter David Rode. Also joining us, Paul Rieckhoff. He's the host of the Independent Americans podcast and the founder and CEO of Independent Veterans of America. David, just take me through the reporting. I mean, this story exploded about, 22 hours ago, first in the New York Times. You've corroborated this reporting and added some context of your own. Just take me through the actual reporting.
This is fantastic journalism. I first want to say this is our job as journalists, is to is our government waging war properly? Are the 50,000 service members risking their lives being served by their leadership? So it was the Washington Post first last week that came out with a 70% of the stockpile of Iran's missile stockpile surviving. That was a surprising number. There were early reports of 30% of it being buried, 30% of it being destroyed.
And the number Trump was using was 18 to 19%.
Yes.
So the Washington Post revelation about 70% seems to stir up reporting about how that's possible, and it's that they shuttered some of the...
Exactly.
Okay, explain that.
So there was a great thing that your team has done a great job. That the issue was that the U.S. only had a certain number of these very expensive bunker buster bombs that would go in, hit the underground storage facilities and destroy everything inside them. And instead, they used smaller bombs to just seal those underground storage areas. The Iranians apparently, through the ceasefire, have gone in, dug into those storage areas and pulled out now. And we thought it would be 60%. It's 70% of their missile stockpile. That's shocking. The mobile launchers, these are trucks that move around with the long-range ballistic missiles. That's a big threat to Israel. It's stunning that 70% of those have survived. They must have hid them. And then what you mentioned, the Strait of Hormuz, is amazing. They built 33 of these specialized sites where they could fire on ships into the strait, whether it was U.S. Navy vessels or tankers. They've restored, again, I think they dug them out, 31 of the 33. It's an amazing setback for the U.S. war in Iran.
And militarily, it doesn't suggest that the U.S. military failed. It really speaks more to Iran's preparation for our assault.
It's a strategy failure by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and by the president. It's, again, this belief that air war alone can allow us to win this war, and it can't. And all these expensive bombs and weapon systems aren't enough to, deal with the fact that you don't have troops on the ground. You don't control the ground, so they're going to go back into these facilities and get these weapons. You can't, and I don't want a ground war, but you can't wage war on the cheap. You can't just do it from the air with cruise missiles. You need to threaten your enemy with forces on the ground. And, Paul can speak about this more. But the lesson here is that, just dropping bombs doesn't win wars.
And let me ask you one more question about the journalism, because it has been met with all the journalism about the war in Iran, which Donald Trump seems to be blaming for the low approval ratings for the war itself. Donald Trump put a sticky note that read treason on top of a stack of news clips.
So, again, Paul, I want Paul and the military experts to speak. But look, during the Vietnam War, the press was attacked because they didn't buy the line that the U.S. was going to bomb the Viet Cong back into the Stone Ages. That didn't work. 50,000 Americans died. I spent a lot of time in Afghanistan. Paul and others have spent a lot of time in Iraq and Afghanistan as well. And we had complete air superiority in Afghanistan for 20 years. So, again, this strategy of relying on air power and our amazing weaponry is just wrong, and it's a mistake, and it's soldiers that are paying the price for it.
Your thoughts?
Truth is always the first casualty of war, and we're in a really difficult and unique and dangerous situation where we can't trust the Iranian regime and we can't trust the Trump regime. So we're trying to parse through the middle of that and find out what the facts are on the ground. We're also not hearing from the Iranians for the most part, at least the Iranian people. So I think we're in a really, really challenging situation where we need the president to prove it, And keep in mind, this is his second shot at this. He had the shot before, and now he's taken a shot again, and it looks like he's missed or he's failed to complete one of his many, well, at least 4 objectives. If they're going to take out the nuke threat, then they've got to answer where's the enriched uranium, where are the threats? And if they can't show us, we can't believe them. And that's where we are now. So we're stuck in this place where he's trying to negotiate with China, who is ultimately the big winner this week, right? They're just happy to sit there and watch us punch ourselves out, put 40% of our Navy in the Gulf, have 50,000 troops tied up. And now we're hearing that the Army has to cut training because of their overcommitment to Iran and to the border. This is how we get overextended. And there's no clear off-ramp here. And unless we send boots on the ground, it doesn't look like we will be able to secure these missile sites, which is why no president has done this before. So now we're seeing the limitations of his strategy, the limitations of our isolation, and the dangerous overflow that can happen for the rest of the world. Because ultimately, the barometer here is the Strait open. They don't need to have full capacity. They just need to have enough to make going through the Strait dangerous, and that puts them into control to have a chokehold over the world's gas station.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. It is hard, dear viewer, to keep track of the very, very long list of shady deals and no-bid contracts and outright corrupt crypto schemes that have been the hallmark of the presidency of Donald Trump, particularly this second version of it. But I ask you tonight to pay attention to the one that he appears to be about to pull off, because it's got to be the greatest heist in American history. A direct transfer of billions of your taxpayer dollars directly into the bank account and the pockets of Donald Trump, all dressed up as a settlement of a lawsuit in which Donald Trump is both the plaintiff and also the defendant. It would be a maneuver that could nearly triple his net worth. It is flying under the radar as Trump landed in China today with great fanfare with a delegation of, oh, look, billionaires and family members in tow. The chosen MAGA elites looking for overseas deals. All of this happening as the Trump administration is literally making your life harder and more expensive with wars and terrorists. But none of that has stopped Trump from trying to get his hands on more of your money. The New York Times, citing 3 people familiar, reports that in the coming days, Trump's Department of Justice may pay out $10 billion or more to Donald Trump to settle his lawsuit against the IRS. Trump filed that suit back in January, saying the agency should have done more to prevent the leak of his tax returns during the 2020 presidential campaign. The president, in effect, sued himself for more than $10 billion, or he sued the government he controls. $10 billion, by the way, is nearly the entire annual IRS budget. And those dollars, if paid out, would come from the U.S. Treasury, which he also oversees. Now, this is so novel, I don't really know how you characterize it legally. Like, we're out past the frontier. Whether legal or not, I am of the strong opinion, and I think many would be also, that this is an attempt at the largest theft ever by an American politician. Plainly, flagrantly, blatantly, in plain daylight. It is a conflict of interest so enormous, the term itself, conflict of interest, hardly begins to capture what's happening. In fact, get this. Last month, a federal judge in the case, a woman named Kathleen Williams, she's the federal judge who's been assigned this lawsuit, right? She gave Trump's private lawyers and the government's attorneys, right, because it's Trump's lawyers and the DOJ attorneys that he controls, she gave them until May 20th to come back and explain how the case isn't a scam to enrich Trump. She's like, wait a second. The Constitution requires cases or controversies, but I don't see one here. She writes, although President Trump avers he is bringing this lawsuit in his personal capacity, he is a sitting president, and his named adversaries are entities whose decisions are subject to his direction. She added, this raises questions here over whether the parties, Donald Trump and Donald Trump, are truly antagonistic to each other. They would have to be antagonistic to each other for this to actually be a case or controversy as defined by the U.S. Constitution. What the judge is saying is like, I don't think this is actually a real case. It can't be you're on both sides. So the lawyers have one more week to file briefs that would convince the judge to let Trump's $10 billion lawsuit continue. But today, sources tell the Times, quote, White House and Justice Department officials have in recent days been exploring ways to potentially settle the suit before that deadline. Essentially find a settlement that would be agreeable to the plaintiff and the defendant, Donald Trump, and shovel tons of cash over to him in return for him dropping the suit. The mob has a word for that: shakedown.
President Trump right now is suing the IRS for a $10 billion shakedown. Think about it. He's suing the federal government that he controls. A check for $10 billion that he hopes to secure that will go to Donald Trump, signed by Donald Trump. And who's paying the check? The American taxpayers.
And think of it again. Your taxes, they come out of your paycheck every week, or you wrote a check April 15th. Some part of that is going to end up in Donald Trump's bank account. No one has ever taken as much money in the history of the nation as Donald Trump is attempting to hoover up from the federal government right now. I don't think there's ever been a $10 billion theft. $10 billion. That's the same amount in child care subsidies that Trump froze last year. $10 billion is almost enough to fund federal disaster relief for a year. It is enough to fund the entire National Park Service, one of the great jewels of this nation, for 5 years. You could fund the Peace Corps for 20 years. It could all go straight into the Trump family coffers. I am telling you, there is no scale or precedent for corruption like this in the United States. It would put every other Trump grift to shame. The gold Trump phones that they sold 590,000 of and not a single one is shipped a year later. The just announced Trump Tower in Tbilisi, Georgia. The bid for defense contracts by a drone company that 2 of Trump's sons are backing. The Truth social media empire that lost $406 million in the last quarter alone. The quid pro quo pardons. The dirty crypto token payments from foreign states. And they appear to have gotten sweetheart deals on AI chips, Trump stakes, and on and on and on and on. All of it pales in comparison to this single ploy for $10 billion. Here's a chart of Trump's estimated net worth over time from Forbes. You can see he has already tripled his wealth since coming back in the office. See those big bars over there on that side? That's the Trump presidency. It's been pretty good for his bottom line. He's up to $6.5 billion, billions of dollars while president. If his government settles his lawsuit the way he wants, his wealth would nearly triple again. This is the president backing a truck up to the doors of Fort Knox, demanding entry, piling gold bars into the back of the truck, and driving off saying, "See ya, suckers." To be clear, Trump doesn't even deny that he will pressure his supporters to pay him off. He just claims the money will go to a good cause.
Is this a good use of taxpayer money?
You can't leak documents. And any money that I win, I'll give it to charity, 100% to charity. Charities that will be approved by government or whatever.
You're going to tell them to pay you, though? You're the boss.
Well, what I would do, tell them to pay me, but I'll give 100% of the money to charity. I don't want any of the money.
You take it out of the system. A couple more questions here.
No, I'm putting it back into the system.
Yeah.
If I give money to American Cancer Society, I will give 100% of the money away to charity. I don't want any of it.
$30 trillion debt, and we're going to take $10 billion out of the system?
Well, I mean, you give it away anyway. They give away a lot of money.
Okay. It'll go to charity. Think for a second. Is Donald Trump going to give billions of dollars of money to charity? The same Donald Trump that we know? The guy who always tells the truth? The guy who promised to make things cheaper for you. The guy who's going to lower cost on day one. Remember that? How's that promise look today? New Labor Department data released Tuesday showed inflation's gotten so bad it is eating up all the gains Americans made in wages for the first time in 3 years. We got producer price numbers today that were eye-poppingly high. Prices keep going up as Trump's bumbling war on Iran makes oil and gas and fertilizer and life-saving medicines rarer and more expensive. The diesel cost is pushing up costs throughout the entire system. New records for diesel costs throughout the Midwest for the second day in a row. This is what life looks like under a Mad King. Every day brings a new let them eat cake moment. And now, as Americans suffer through the war and the economy that Donald Trump imposed on them, again, unilaterally, by himself, didn't have to do it, did it. He is scheming nearly full time about helping himself to billions more of your money. It has never been clearer who he's looking out for.
Starting on day one, we will end inflation and make America affordable again.
Mr. President, to what extent are Americans' financial situations motivating you to make a deal?
Not even bit. The only thing that matters when I'm talking about Iran, they can't have a nuclear weapon. I don't think about American financial situation. I don't think about anybody.
He doesn't think about Americans' financial situations. In the pantheon of presidential gaffes, this is a big one. And there's a narrative I've told you where people say, oh, Trump gets away with everything. Nobody cares. And then there's the reality that his polls are crashing, Republicans retiring, Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson saying he's, quote, evil, and they're done with him. And we're still in the beginning of this. Donald Trump's already crashed to the worst second-term approval of any president since we've been measuring. And comments like this obviously don't help. Democrats hitting him for it.
It's good to see Donald Trump telling the truth about something.
Donald Trump has made clear that he and the Republican Party don't give a damn about the personal finances of the American people.
I don't see how he has time to think about the financial prospects of the American working class when he's spending all of his time thinking about how to enrich himself.
He's not even trying. No. He's just saying, it doesn't matter to me.
He's certainly not focused on the everyday costs of struggling working families.
Costs have gone up, and it's a direct result of Republican policies.
Here are the numbers. Groceries, gas, energy prices, regular consumer goods are all up. 59% of Americans view the economy as getting worse. And a whopping 3/4 of the country blames Trump, 77%. I mean, that is just an overwhelming show of unity in our divided times that this is Trump's fault as inflation ticks up near 4%, a 3-year high. Here's how it's playing on Fox.
Food prices, grocery prices, core inflation, those numbers are up.
We are now deeper in the red. Markets do not like what they're seeing.
This is pretty devastating, actually.
Now, you might expect any politician in any party in any decade to say, I hear you, we're working on it, I'm thinking about it, I feel your pain, yada, yada, yada. The phrases sort of write themselves, right? But Donald Trump has this problem where he often does blurt things that are true. The Washington Post said he's been caught in more lies than any other public official ever. So he does lie a lot, but then he blurts things that are true. You heard the Democrats there saying this is true. He doesn't think about it. He doesn't care. And Republicans have a problem at a time where they don't want to be tied to that. And they've been asked about this gaffe.
The president thinks about Americans' financial situation.
Every time I talk to him, he's focused on affordability.
I didn't see that.
He's got a lot on his plate, including the war.
When we get the Strait of Hormuz reopened, that will alleviate a lot of pressure with gas prices and other things in the economy.
That's the speaker's view. Here's some reporting. Iran has restored the operational access to the vast majority of its missile sites. That's 30 out of 33 if you're counting, and the New York Times did. That's a long ways from what Trump and his Pentagon were pushing, the idea that even though people are paying a lot and there's no end in sight and we got a bad situation because the strait is closed when it used to be open, at least they've obliterated a lot of Iran's weapons potential. It's not even true. I'm joined now by Reverend Al Sharpton, the host of Politics Nation and president of the National Action Network. I went through all that. It makes him look bad, but it's all true. I mean, I just went through the numbers and what he's saying and why Republicans are running from what Trump is saying. Your view tonight.
When you look at the president saying out of his own mouth that he's not caring about the financial status of Americans, while he was headed to China with his billionaire buddies as his friends going with him to cut whatever deal that is there, that the purpose of them going. I mean, you have to stop and ask yourself now, I don't care. I'm not concerned with America's finances, but I am concerned about Elon Musk and the 2 or 3 other billionaires that I'm going to bring with me that need to get their deals straight with China. So how contemptible is that to the American people? He didn't just say this now at some backward rally somewhere. He said this on his way to hook up with his billionaire boys and board Air Force One that we're paying for to go over to China to try and work out some energy deals, some technology deals and all. Otherwise, there's no reason for them to be there. If any other president had done this, he would be the first one calling for their impeachment. This is like spitting in the face of Americans. It's bad enough you're rolling up the gas stations and the price is $4.50 up. It's bad enough groceries are up. But now you have the guy you voted for, if you're in a red state or if you're a member of MAGA, saying, I'm not thinking about you. Come on, Elon, come on. I'm going to get these. Let's talk to Xi about getting some of this business straight. And he's saying it out loud.
You know, we've talked, and you've lived a career that looks at the slow march of public opinion on civil rights, marriage equality. It can take decades. What does it tell you when we look at $29 billion for this war and the gas reaction, that in a matter of weeks, people went from skeptical concern, I mean, nobody was welcoming it, to now just a country, including Tucker and the folks I mentioned, just wholly against this war?
I think that what it shows is that, one, Americans are a lot wiser and a lot more informed. Second, they were overpromised by Trump in the first place. So if you're looking for, if you're a child and daddy promised you a pony and he shows up with a squirrel, you're disappointed because it's not what you were looking for. And third is because he is so blatant and open with it. We've never had a president that would openly show how he does not care about the average American, doesn't understand what they're going through, and really has no compassion for them. I think that combination cut the calendar, because you don't have someone trying to act compassionate or act like I'm getting it or act like I feel your pain. You have somebody that's saying, oh, you're hurting? Oh, well, that's too bad. I've got this deal to cut. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And I think that even the most avid fan of Donald Trump has to question themselves, and the rest of them have to say, this is not what we bargained for.
That's bull crap.
He doesn't care about our situation. He doesn't. He's just here for pride and ego. He's not lying, and he proves it. Not only that, but also like food stamps and other stuff. He does not care about our financial situation.
The fact that he said that he doesn't care about America's financial situation.
That's ridiculous. He's a pompous idiot.
You were born with a silver spoon in your mouth. Of course, the American pockets don't mean anything to you.
Americans react to Donald Trump's economy and his comments. We're back with Rev Sharpton. The question was, if we were just a different system like England, if there was a vote, would Trump even survive a no-confidence vote today?
My guess would be he wouldn't, because you have some of his major cheerleaders that would have been screaming in the House of Commons, if we're using that as the example, on his behalf, that are now screaming on the other side, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, like Tucker Carlson. But when you start seeing people in South Carolina legislators saying, well, I don't know if we can do what the president wants us to do to cut up Jim Clyburn's district. Now, we don't know where they're going to finally land, but even the fact there's a pause tells me in that kind of situation, if we had the House of Commons, he wouldn't have enough people yelling on the other side, because he has not only hurt the American public and said, I don't care. He has put a knife in the back of his own Republican fellow office holders. And he says, I don't care about y'all. I don't care how your districts end up. I don't care what you've got to try to sell in November during the midterms. I'm going to do me. And if you don't like it, I'll get up at, he maybe hadn't gone to bed at 1 a.m, and I'll write about you on social media, and then I'll take a nap in the next day in the middle of our meetings.
Now, Rev, they say it was an alleged nap.
Well, if it looks like a nap, it appears like a nap, and you're nodding like a nap, it's a nap.
Respect. And in my day, people who are telling you, oh, I didn't snore, I wasn't asleep. I have a family member, I'm not going to say who used to say, well, I was just resting my eyes.
Yeah, I've had that.
Yeah, here it is. Well, I was just resting my eyes, and it's like, okay, come on now.
Right. You're just resting his eyes in the middle of everything going on. And then a little nod. So, I mean, this is a president that stays up all night on social media and nods off every time during the day.
It's fair, right? You know, it's funny because you just said something very precise. We'll put it back up. We'll do it live, as your friend Bill used to say.
Right.
But we're actually going to run the video again. Unlike other presidents, he posts 30, 40 times in the evening.
Right.
And we see it, and he says it's him. He doesn't deny it. So we actually know why he might be tired. To your point, he's allegedly sleeping on the job, literally, because we know that all night he was posting hate and lies. That's what kept him up instead of doing the people's business. I mean, it's quite that literal, isn't it?
That is literally what happens. You see the time of his Truth social media postings. There's no staff there. There's no one to say, Mr. President, be careful. So he enjoys doing that. It's the real Trump. This is who he really is in the middle of the night with no kind of boundaries, nobody around him. And he gives all of the venom he can all night to where he's exhausted the next day when he's taking care of things like dealing with the war in the Straits of Hormuz and all that. I'm tired. Yeah. I've been up all night calling people names that are my political enemies. That's my pride.
And we know why. And look, you run it back. You know everybody. I always tell folks, in New York, Rev knows everybody. You remember Nas, and famously said, "I never sleep because sleep is the cousin of death." You know, you want to stay up,
right?
Especially if you're dealing with real stuff. And apparently, he didn't get the memo.
He didn't get the memo, but I will send him some Nas. Oh, no, I don't want him to write against Nas. So let's leave it there.
Yeah, we don't need a revived Trump ether battle. I mean, Trump might have been better served to just be a battle rapper and just insult other people and just save the whole government thing. You know, that could have been a fruitful time for him.
Well, I don't know if it would have been better for him, but it certainly would have been better for us.
For weeks, Donald Trump has been bragging about his big renovations to the iconic Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool. And the Trump administration hired a company that had never worked for the federal government before, giving them a special no-bid contract that has grown from an initial cost of around $1.8 million to more than $13 million. And now it appears that project isn't going so well. The New York Times reports that the repairs appear uneven and behind schedule. And so naturally, Trump is distancing himself from the company doing those repairs, posting on Truth Social, quote, "I didn't give out the contract," quote, I don't know why it's in quotes, "Interior did, to a contractor I did not know and have never used before." Interesting. I mean, why would anyone assume Trump had chosen the contractor for this pool project?
I said, you know, Doug, I have a guy who's unbelievable at doing swimming pools. I said, what we're going to do is I'm going to call all three of these people that have worked for me in the past doing swimming pools. So I called people that do swimming pools, and I said, go take a look at it. I said, I have an idea. I'm going to send my contractor over and take a look. So I have some very good contractors, some good, one or two in particular. And I sent the the three best. He looked at it, he called me up, he said, so we can do something on it? He came back, he said, what an exciting job, sir.
Oh, right. Maybe because Donald Trump said repeatedly in public on camera that he personally chose his pool guys to renovate the reflecting pool, which is not a swimming pool. And I don't know if he's confused or not. And now the New York Times has obtained documents from Interior Department staff that raise concerns about the quality and speed of the repairs. That document reportedly says that there are bubbles and holes in the waterproofing, and uneven coating has left the pool mottled in various shades of blue, which is weird, because the reflecting pool wasn't bright blue before. I mean, why are they going to all that trouble to paint it bright blue in the first place?
We actually picked the color. It's called American Flag Blue. It's called American Flag Blue. I said, that's the color I want. I said, that's the color I want. I want American Flag Blue. American Flag Blue. I said, that's the color I like. I picked American Flag. See the blue? I picked American Flag. It was called American Flag Blue.
All right. That's why. This whole project seems like a huge freaking mess. I mean, the renovations are shoddy, the budget's ballooning, and it's also reportedly behind schedule, which is especially noteworthy because the Trump administration skirted the rules for choosing federal contractors specifically because they said it needed to be done before the America 250 celebration on July 4th. Today, Democratic Congressman Joe Neguse pressed Trump's Interior Secretary about how this all came about.
Who picked this company? Because President Trump a few months ago in a New York Times article said, I have a guy who's unbelievable at doing swimming pools. He looked at it. He called me up. He said, sir, we can do something on it.
The National Park Service and the leaders on the National Mall are the ones that picked it.
A no-bid contract is reserved for situations where, quote, any delay would cause serious injury to the government.
We had 19 fountains across the city that didn't work.
That's the serious injury to the government? The serious injury to the government?
Well,
joining me now is the guy who couldn't keep a straight face there. I wouldn't have been able to either. Democratic Congressman Joe Neguse, ranking member on the House Subcommittee on Federal Lands. Okay, this story, I mean, Trump spent weeks saying he chose his pool guy for this contract, and the White House told the New York Times that Trump didn't have a personal relationship with the contractor, but was familiar with their work. Then Doug Burgum told you that the contractor Trump kept talking about wasn't part of the project at all. And of course, the work is incredibly shoddy. What is going on here? To the degree you know.
Well, first and foremost, thanks for having me on, Jen. And thank you for your reporting, I think, in exposing these improprieties. As you saw from that exchange, there are more questions than answers. The reality is that Secretary Burgum really couldn't offer a cogent rationale for why his agency gave a no-bid $13 million contract to this contractor who apparently, by all accounts, has never had a federal contract before. And of course, as you've covered extensively, the conflicting reports. One day, the president claims that it's his pool guy. Then he denies that that's the case and that he had nothing to do with it. The secretary really had no particular answer to the questions that I posed. So I think that we're going to find out that there are even more improprieties. At best, it is a gross waste of taxpayer resources. At worst, it's another violation, potentially, of federal procurement laws. And I think more generally, it's symptomatic of the grift and the fraud and I think the corruption that we've seen within this administration just metastasize over the course of the last 18 months.
Your point about it being a pattern is so important. I mean, the reflecting pool, for those of us who live in Washington or anyone who's visited, is obviously a historic landmark, but it's bigger than that. I mean, they're giving out no-bid contracts to companies doing not just that, but the ballroom renovation, repairing fountains in Lafayette Park. Help us understand why it's so important. I mean, I know the answer to this, but you actually have oversight over this. For there to actually be a bidding process and for these contracts to go through official processes through the federal government?
Well, first I'll say anyone who doubts that this is pervasive throughout the administration, look no further than former Secretary Kristi Noem, as you know, who was fired at least in part based off of all of the improprieties there that her department was engaged in under her leadership. Look, at the end of the day, this is taxpayer money. It is not Donald Trump's money. It doesn't belong to his billionaire cabinet that he's assembled. It is the money of hardworking taxpayers. We have federal procurement laws for a reason, so that ultimately the taxpayers are not getting fleeced by virtue of any potential conflicts of interest. And of course, in this case, you have Donald Trump saying this is going to cost $1 million, $2 million. It's ballooned now to $13 million. Lord only knows how high that number will ultimately go. By the way, just contextually, he's asked Congress for a $10 billion slush fund for these vanity projects while they are gutting the public land management agencies that folks out west in Colorado and the Rocky Mountain West that I represent rely on day in, day out. So I think the American people are fed up with this kind of corruption, and that's why, in part, his unfavorability is so high.
It's such an important point. I mean, federal government money is not endless. It's not growing on trees. If they're spending it on things like repainting bright blue, American flag blue, the reflecting pool, they're not spending it on other things.
Exactly.
I'm so grateful you're here. Thank you so much for being here with me and for grilling Secretary Burgum there today. It was fun to watch you do that.
Thank you.